I needed the money. That's the simple truth of it. Divorce papers don't care about your pride, and neither do overdue bills. The job posting showed up on a Tuesday. Night maintenance at Riverside Memorial Hospital. Decent pay for basic cleaning work. Nothing fancy, but steady. I'd been scraping by with day labor since Janet took half of everything and left me with all the debt. Construction work when I could find it. Loading trucks, whatever paid cash, and didn't ask too many questions about why a guy with a college degree was mopping floors. But this was different. Benefits, set schedule. The kind of work that might let me sleep in an actual bed instead of my truck. I called that afternoon. The woman who answered had a calm voice. Professional. She scheduled an interview for the next morning without asking much about my background. Said her name was Pamela Wang, facilities supervisor. Told me to come to the main entrance and ask for her at the information desk. Should have been my first clue something wasn't quite right. Most places want your whole life story before they'll even talk to you. Riverside Memorial sits on the east side of town. One of those old brick buildings that's been added onto so many times it looks like 3 different hospitals stuck together. I'd driven past it plenty but never really paid attention. Big place. Bigger than I expected when I pulled into the visitor lot. The lobby was typical hospital stuff. Beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, that smell of disinfectant that never quite covers up whatever it's trying to hide. Information desk sat right in the middle, staffed by a volunteer who looked old enough to have been there when they laid the cornerstone. "I'm here to see Pamela Wang," I said. She made a phone call, told me to take a seat. I didn't wait long. Maybe 5 minutes before a woman in a dark blue pantsuit came down the hall. Professional looking. Wire-rimmed glasses, hair pulled back neat. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from running things. "Mr. Day?" I stood up. "Yes, ma'am." "Pamela Wang, thank you for coming in." Her handshake was firm, direct. "Let's go to my office." She led me down a hallway lined with those motivational posters you see in every office building. Teamwork, excellence, a picture of a mountain climber with something about reaching new heights. We took an elevator to the 2nd floor. Her office was small but organized. Desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet. Window looked out on the parking lot. She gestured for me to sit. "So you're interested in our night maintenance position?" "Yes, ma'am. I saw the posting online." She opened a folder on her desk. "Your application shows construction experience. Electrical work. Why the career change?" I'd practiced this answer. Looking for something more stable. Regular hours. Benefits. She nodded. Didn't push for details about why a licensed electrician was applying to push a mop. I appreciated that. "The position is part-time to start. 30 hours a week. Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Pays $18 an hour." I tried not to let my face show how much that meant. 18 an hour was more than I'd made consistently in months. "The work itself is straightforward," she continued. "Cleaning and basic maintenance on our 3rd-floor psychiatric wing." Psychiatric wing? It's been closed since 2019. Budget cuts. The space isn't in active use, but we're required to maintain it for insurance purposes. She leaned back in her chair. The job involves mopping floors, emptying trash, basic custodial duties. Nothing complicated. Something in her tone suggested there was more to it, but 18 an hour was 18 an hour. That sounds manageable. There are some specific protocols you'll need to follow. She opened another folder, thicker than the first. The 3rd floor has some unique characteristics. Residual activity from when it was operational. Residual activity? She paused, seemed to be choosing her words carefully. Sometimes former patients return to familiar places. They don't always understand that the ward has closed. You might encounter individuals who believe they're still receiving treatment there. I waited for her to explain further. She didn't. Encounter them how? Walking the halls, sitting in common areas, looking for staff members who are no longer there. Her voice stayed level, matter of fact. When this happens, there are specific procedures to follow. She slid a typed sheet across the desk, 7 numbered points in courier font. 1. Do not engage in conversation beyond acknowledging their presence. 2. If asked for medication or treatment, direct them to speak with their assigned nurse. 3. Do not attempt to explain that the ward is closed. 4. If they become agitated, move to a different area and return later. 5. Never touch or attempt to physically guide them. 6. Document any encounters in the logbook kept at the main station. 7. If you feel unsafe, leave the floor immediately and contact security. I read through the list twice. These are patients who, broke in somehow? Something like that. She folded her hands on the desk. The important thing is following the protocols. They're in place for everyone's safety. None of it made much sense, but I'd worked weirder jobs. Construction sites with their own strange rules. Warehouses where you didn't ask questions about what was in certain containers. Every workplace has its quirks. What happened to the last person who had this job? Her expression shifted slightly. Clay Shepard. He worked here for about 6 months before resigning without notice. Why'd he quit? He found the work challenging. Some people aren't suited for the environment. The way she said it suggested there was more to the story. But I needed the job, and she was offering it. The pay includes a night differential and full benefits after 90 days, she said. Health insurance, dental, 2 weeks paid vacation after a year. Benefits. I hadn't had health insurance since the divorce. Janet kept the plan through her job, left me to figure out my own coverage. When would I start? Tonight, if you're available. I can show you around, introduce you to the protocols in person. Clay left some training notes that might be helpful. I thought about my truck payment, due in 3 days, the stack of bills on my kitchen table, the conversation I'd had with my landlord about being late on rent. I'll take it. She smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. Excellent. There is one more thing. She opened a desk drawer, pulled out a form. Given the nature of the work, we require employees to sign a confidentiality agreement. Standard procedure for positions involving sensitive areas of the hospital. The form was brief, basically said I wouldn't discuss details of my work with outside parties, wouldn't share information about patients or hospital operations. Standard stuff, except for a clause about not discussing unusual incidents or encounters with anyone outside the facilities department. I signed it without reading too carefully. Should have, maybe. But $18 an hour buys a lot of willingness to overlook fine print. Welcome to Riverside Memorial, Mr. Day. She stood up, extended her hand again. I think you'll find the work quite manageable once you adjust to the routine. I shook her hand and tried to ignore the feeling that I was missing something important, something about the way she talked around certain details, the careful word choices, the protocols that didn't quite make sense. But I needed the money. And sometimes you don't get to ask all the questions you want. The first night alone was worse than I expected. Pamela left me at 11:30, handed me the keys and said she'd be back at 8 in the morning. Simple enough. I watched her disappear into the elevator, heard it close with that mechanical groan, and then it was just me and the 3rd floor. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just listening. The silence wasn't really silence, you know. Old buildings make noise, pipes settling, heating units cycling on and off, that low electrical hum you don't notice until there's nothing else. But it felt different up there. Heavier, I guess. The hallway stretched in both directions from the nurse station. Beige walls, industrial carpeting that had seen better days, fluorescent lights that flickered every so often. Room after room of empty doorways. Some had the doors propped open. Others were closed tight. I'd been in hospitals before. When my dad had his heart attack. When Janet broke her wrist that time. but this felt like a hospital after everyone went home and forgot to turn off the lights. Started with the east wing, like Pamela showed me. Mopping, wiping down surfaces, checking the windows were secure. The patient rooms were the worst part. Each one had 2 beds with those plastic mattresses, a small dresser, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. Personal stuff was long gone, but you could still see the marks on the walls where people had hung pictures or taped up drawings. One room had scratch marks on the door frame. Deep ones, like someone had clawed at the wood with their fingernails. I ran my finger over them while I was wiping down the frame, fresh enough that I could feel the splinters. Made me think about Clay Shepard. What had he seen that made him walk away from $18 an hour? The protocols Pamela gave me seemed like overkill for an empty floor. 7 rules for dealing with people who shouldn't be there in the first place. I kept the list folded in my shirt pocket, pulled it out a few times that first week just to read through them again. Acknowledge presence only. Made sense, I suppose. Direct medication requests to assigned nurses. What assigned nurses? The floor was closed. Never explain the ward closure. Why would I need to explain anything to nobody? But I followed them anyway. $18 an hour buys a lot of rule following. The cleaning routine took about 6 hours once I got the hang of it. East wing first, then west wing, then the common areas. Kitchen, day room, group therapy room with the chairs still arranged in a circle. Someone had left a crossword puzzle book on one of the tables. Half finished, pencil still lying next to it. I didn't touch it. Nights blurred together after that first week. Same routine, same rooms, same sounds. The building settled around me while I worked, creaking and sighing like it was trying to get comfortable. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps from the floor below, probably security doing their rounds. Sometimes a car would pull into the parking lot, and I'd watch from the windows as someone hurried into the emergency entrance. The isolation got to me more than I expected. Not used to working completely alone. Even the construction jobs had other guys around. Someone to complain about the weather with or share a thermos of coffee. Up there, it was just me and the echo of my own footsteps. Started talking to myself around the 3rd week. Nothing crazy, just commenting on what I was doing. Okay, East Wing's done. Time for the day room. Felt less empty that way. The money made it bearable, though. First paycheck was bigger than anything I'd seen since before the divorce. Covered my truck payment and rent with enough left over for groceries that weren't ramen noodles or gas station sandwiches. For the first time in months, I could think about something other than which bill to pay late. Every morning at 8, Pamela would show up with her clipboard and coffee, ask how the night went. Not much to report, I'd tell her. Finished the cleaning checklist, checked all the rooms, everything secure. She'd nod and make a note, ask if I had any questions or concerns. What was I supposed to say? That the scratch marks on the door frame bothered me? That I kept hearing footsteps that might have been pipes settling? That I found myself checking over my shoulder more often than I should? She seemed satisfied with no problems and routine maintenance completed. I started keeping a little notebook, writing down what I did each night. Mopped East Wing hallway, cleaned 12 patient rooms, wiped down nurse station, checked windows and day room. Basic stuff, but it felt professional. Like I was taking the job seriously. The pay stub made everything else fade into background noise. $540 a week take home. More than I'd made in months of scraping together day labor. Enough to think about getting an apartment again instead of sleeping in my truck behind the 24-hour diner. Started bringing a radio to work around the 4th week. Classic rock station that came in clear enough, kept the volume low, made the halls feel less like a tomb. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming along while I mopped, forgetting where I was for a few minutes. That's when I began understanding Clay's problem. Wasn't anything specific I could point to, just the accumulation of being alone up there night after night, surrounded by empty rooms that used to be full of people. The weight of all that silence pressing down. Some nights I'd stand in the day room and imagine what it must have been like when it was operating. Patients watching television, playing cards, talking to nurses about their medications. Now it was just me and my mop bucket. Clay had lasted 6 months, Pamela said. I was only a month in and already feeling the edges of something I couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly. More like being slowly worn down by the emptiness of the place. But nothing supernatural happened. No voices in the walls, no doors slamming shut on their own, no ghostly figures drifting through the corridors. Just an old hospital floor that felt heavier than it should, quieter than made sense. Maybe that was enough to break someone down over time. Maybe Clay had started hearing things that weren't there, or seeing movement in his peripheral vision that turned out to be shadows from the parking lot lights. Maybe he'd started talking to himself too much, or stopped sleeping during the day because he kept thinking about the empty rooms. I could see how it might happen. The money kept me going, though. Every week that direct deposit hit my account and reminded me why I was there. $18 an hour to clean empty rooms and follow 7 protocols for people who probably weren't coming back. Seemed manageable enough. Even if the atmosphere made my skin crawl sometimes, even if I found myself checking the locks twice before I left each morning, nothing had actually happened yet. 6 months in, things changed. Not all at once. Gradual, you know. First, it was just movement in my peripheral vision. Something white drifting past a doorway while I mopped the east wing. I'd look up, check the hall. Nothing there. Figured it was fatigue. Hell, I'd been working nights for half a year by then. Your eyes play tricks when you're tired, but then I started seeing them properly. The first one I really saw was an old woman in a hospital gown, faded blue with those little ties in the back. She shuffled out of room 307 on a Tuesday night around 2 in the morning. I was wiping down the nurse station when I heard her slippers on the linoleum, soft sound, like sandpaper on wood. She moved slow, one hand trailing along the wall for balance. Had to be 70, maybe 80 years old. Gray hair pulled back in a thin ponytail. When she saw me, she stopped. "Excuse me," she said, voice like paper. "Do you know where Dr. Martinez is? I was supposed to get my pills an hour ago." I pulled Pamela's protocol list from my shirt pocket. Rule 1, acknowledge presence only. Rule 2, direct medication requests to assigned nurses. "You'll need to speak with your nurse about that," I said. She nodded, seemed to accept this. Then she turned around and shuffled back toward room 307. I watched until she disappeared inside. Then I wrote down the room number in my notebook, something to tell Pamela in the morning. That was just the beginning. Within a week, I was seeing them every night. 3, 4, sometimes 5 different people, all wearing hospital gowns, all elderly, all confused about where they were and when they were. There was the man who kept asking for Dr. Peterson. Tall guy, probably 6'2" in his day, but bent over now with age. He'd wander the west wing calling out, "Dr. Peterson? Dr. Peterson, are you here?" His voice echoed off the empty walls. I looked up Peterson in the employee directory once. He'd transferred to St. Mary's in 2018. Rule 3 said never explain the ward closure. So when the old man asked me directly, I just said, "Dr. Peterson isn't available right now." He'd nod and keep looking. Then there was the woman who sat in the day room every night. Small thing, maybe 90 pounds. She'd position herself in the same chair by the window and stare out at the parking lot, waiting for someone. "My daughter's coming to visit," she told me once when I was emptying the trash. She said 3 o'clock. I glanced at my watch, 3:45 in the morning. "That's nice," I said, kept working. She waited there until sunrise, every night. Same chair, same expectant expression, watching cars that never came. Following the protocols got easier with practice. Rule 4, move away if patients become agitated. Rule 5, never touch patients. Rule 6, document encounters in the logbook. I started carrying a small notepad specifically for tracking them. Room numbers, times, what they said. My morning reports to Pamela went from 2 sentences to half a page. Saw patient in room 312 asking about breakfast schedule. Patient in West Wing looking for someone named Margaret. Elderly woman in day room waiting for family visit. Pamela would nod and make notes on her clipboard. Never seemed surprised. Never asked for details beyond what I wrote down. The strangest part was watching their routines. They moved through the empty ward like it was still operating. Like they had somewhere to be. I'd see them attending invisible therapy sessions. 5 or 6 of them would gather in the group therapy room, sitting in that circle of chairs, facing an empty spot where a counselor should have been. They'd nod along with conversations I couldn't hear, take turns speaking to no one. One night, I watched an old man present something to the empty room. Stood up, gestured with his hands, sat back down. The others clapped silently. The medication station drew them like a magnet. They'd line up there around 9 every night, waiting patiently in single file. Some carried little paper cups. Others just stood with their hands out, ready to receive pills that weren't coming. I'd walk past them to mop the area. They'd step aside politely, let me work, then resume their places in line. Never got angry about the wait. Just patient. Rule 7 said, leave immediately if feeling unsafe and contact security. But I never felt unsafe around them. Confused, yeah. Unsettled, definitely. But not threatened. They treated me like staff. Polite, respectful, asked their questions and accepted my non-answers without argument. Most of the time, they seemed to forget I was there, which made sense, I guess. If they thought the ward was still running, I was just another employee doing his job. Nothing worth paying attention to. My reports to Pamela kept getting longer as more of them appeared. By the end of the month, I was documenting 8 or 9 encounters per night. Patient in room 321 asked about Dr. Williams. Patient near elevator requested information about family visiting hours. Elderly man in kitchen area looking for dinner service. Dr. Williams had retired in 2016. Family visiting hours hadn't existed here since the ward closed. Dinner service was a memory. But they kept asking, kept looking, kept following schedules from when this place was alive. Some of them had specific requests that broke my heart a little. The woman who asked about her grandson's birthday party, supposed to happen next Sunday, according to her. But she was talking about a date 3 years past. The man who wanted to call his wife didn't understand why the phones weren't working. I started recognizing their patterns, who appeared when, which rooms they preferred, what questions they'd ask. Became part of my routine, same as mopping floors or checking windows. Document the encounters, report the room numbers, move on. The work felt different now. Less empty. Still strange as hell, but not lonely anymore. Hard to feel alone when you're sharing the space with a dozen confused people, even if they're not quite, well, you know. The encounters felt surreal, but harmless enough. Like watching actors rehearse a play I couldn't quite understand. The charts started appearing around my 7th month on the job. Not appearing, really. That's not the right word. They were always there. I just never paid attention before. See, I'd been focused on the patients themselves, the wandering, the requests for doctors, the endless waiting by windows. Hard to notice paperwork when you're watching a 90-pound woman sit in the same chair every night, looking for a daughter who never comes. But one Tuesday around 3 a.m., I was wiping down the nurse's station when I actually looked at what was scattered across the counter. Not just looked, saw charts, patient charts. 20, maybe 25 manila folders spread out like someone had been reviewing them recently. I stopped wiping, set down my spray bottle. The top folder was labeled Dorothy Chen in neat black ink. Inside, handwritten notes filled page after page. Treatment plans, medication schedules, therapy progress reports, all dated within the last few weeks. Patient continues to respond well to evening Ativan dose, one entry read. Anxiety levels decreased during family visit hours. Recommend continuing current regimen. Another note, different handwriting. Dorothy expressed concern about missed dinner service. Reassured patient about meal schedule. No further agitation observed. I flipped through more pages. Detailed observations. Medication adjustments. Behavioral notes. Everything you'd expect in an active patient file. Except the ward had been closed since 2019. I picked up another folder. Harold Morrison. Same thing. Pages of recent documentation, treatment updates, progress notes, all written like he was still receiving care. That's when it hit me. Dorothy Chen, the small woman who sat by the day room window every night waiting for her daughter. Harold Morrison, the tall man who bent with age, calling for Dr. Peterson in the West Wing. I knew these names. I'd been watching these people for months. My hands started shaking. Just a little tremor, but enough that I had to set the folder down. See, I'm not quick with connections sometimes. Takes me a while to put pieces together. But once they click, they really click. I grabbed my notepad, the one where I'd been tracking encounters, flipped through pages of my own handwriting, room numbers, times, patient descriptions. Dorothy Chen, room 312, sits by day room window nightly, asks about daughter's 3 o'clock visit. Harold Morrison, room 318, wanders west wing calling for Dr. Peterson, approximately 6:02, but stooped. Margaret Walsh, room 305, lines up for medication at 9 p.m., always carries empty paper cup. Every name in my notepad matched a chart on the counter. Every single one. I spent the next hour going through the folders, 23 charts total, 23 names I recognized from my nightly encounters, people I'd spoken to, people who'd asked me about doctors and medications and visiting hours. But here's what really got to me. The handwriting. Each chart contained notes from multiple sources, different pens, different styles, some entries in careful cursive, others in hurried print, like various nurses and doctors had been documenting throughout shifts. Except I worked alone, completely alone. Had been for 7 months. Who was writing these notes? I looked closer at the dates. Yesterday's date, last week's dates. Some entries from just 2 days ago describing interactions I remembered witnessing. Dorothy's agitation about her daughter. Harold's confusion about Dr. Peterson's schedule. Margaret's concern about medication timing. Someone was documenting their behavior, documenting it like they were real patients receiving real care. But that someone wasn't me. The next night, I paid attention to the station differently. When I arrived at 11:30, the charts were there, scattered across the counter in the same pattern. When I left at 6 a.m., they were still there, same positions. During my cleaning rounds, I'd check back periodically. The charts never moved, never changed position, but somehow new entries kept appearing. I'd find fresh notes written in different hands. Updates about patient behavior, medication observations, therapy session summaries for sessions that didn't exist. Patient exhibited increased restlessness during evening hours. One new entry read, recommend adjusting sleep medication dosage. The ink looked fresh. The handwriting was steady, professional, like a nurse had just finished her rounds and updated the file, except no nurses worked the 3rd floor. Hadn't for years. By Thursday, I couldn't ignore it anymore, had to know for sure. I went down to the main floor during my break, found a computer terminal in the staff lounge, figured if these were real patients, they'd be in the system. Active files, current status, room assignments. The database search was simple enough. Just typed in the names from the charts. Dorothy Chen, date of birth, March 15th, 1942. Admitted to psychiatric ward, October 21st, 2018. Discharge January 8th, 2019. Status: deceased. Date of death: January 8th, 2019. Natural causes. I stared at the screen. Read it twice. Checked the name again. Harold Morrison. Same search process. Status: deceased. Date of death: March 3rd, 2017. Natural causes: Margaret Walsh. Status: deceased. Date of death: November 22nd, 2015. Natural causes. One by one, I searched every name from the charts, every patient I'd encountered during my months of cleaning the third floor, every person who'd asked me about doctors and medications and visiting hours. All deceased. All died between 2015 and 2019. All during their final weeks of treatment at Riverside Memorial. Natural causes. Every single one. Heart failure. Stroke. Complications from various conditions. Nothing suspicious. Nothing violent. Just elderly people reaching the end of their lives in a place meant to help them. Except they were still here. Still wandering the halls. Still asking for doctors. Still waiting for families. Still lining up for medications. Still being documented in active patient charts by invisible staff members. 23 people. 23 deaths. 23 active files for patients who'd been dead for years. I sat in that staff lounge for 20 minutes, just staring at the computer screen, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. These weren't confused patients who'd wandered back to the ward. These weren't people with dementia who'd forgotten the closure. These were dead people. I'd been talking to dead people for months, following protocols designed for dead people, documenting encounters with dead people in my nightly reports to Pamela. And Pamela knew. Had to know. The protocols she'd given me weren't for confused patients. They were for ghosts. The next morning, I waited for Pamela by the elevator. Didn't want to have this conversation in her office. Needed to catch her off guard. Get honest answers. She stepped out at 8 a.m. sharp, clipboard in hand, same as always. "We need to talk," I said. Something in my voice must have given it away. She stopped walking, looked at me with those wire-rimmed glasses, and I saw recognition in her eyes. "The charts," I said. "I found the charts." She nodded slowly. "How many?" 23. All deceased. All dead for years. Pamela checked her watch, glanced around the hallway, made sure we were alone. "My office," she said. "We'll discuss this properly." "We'll discuss it now." She looked at me again, really looked, like she was seeing me for the first time. "Emergency meeting," she said finally. "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. There are things you need to understand about your position here." I walked home that morning, knowing everything had changed. The job I thought I understood. Cleaning empty rooms, following strange protocols for confused patients. That job didn't exist. The real job was something else entirely. Something Pamela had been carefully avoiding explaining for 7 months. I'd been working as a custodian for dead people. And somehow, that was exactly what Riverside Memorial needed me to do. I got to the hospital early that afternoon. Didn't want to be late for whatever Pamela had to tell me. Found her already waiting in her office when I arrived at 10 minutes to 2. She was sitting behind her desk, with a manila folder open in front of her, reading through what looked like official documents, different from her usual clipboard and coffee routine. "Maxwell." She looked up when I knocked on the doorframe. "Come in. Close the door." I did what she said and took the chair across from her desk. Same chair I'd sat in 7 months ago when she hired me. Felt different now, though. Heavier, maybe. She closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. "You found the charts." 23 of them. I kept my voice steady. "All dead for years." "I know." She nodded. "I put them there." That surprised me. I'd figured someone else was updating those charts, some other staff member I hadn't met. Made sense that it was her, though. She was the one who knew about everything. "The protocols," I said. You wrote those for dead people. I did. And Clay Shepard. He figured it out too? After 4 months. Pamela adjusted her glasses. He didn't handle it well. Started trying to communicate directly with them, against the protocols. What happened? He had a breakdown. Started talking about the patients following him home, appearing in his apartment. Had to be hospitalized for 3 weeks. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Are they going to follow me home? Not if you follow the protocols. She leaned forward slightly. That's why they exist, Maxwell. To keep everyone safe, including you. She opened the folder again and pulled out a thick stack of papers, hospital documents from the look of them, official letterhead and signatures. The 3rd floor closed in March 2019, she said. Budget cuts from the state. We had 47 long-term patients at the time. 47. I'd only seen maybe 15 or 20 different people during my months working up there. Wondered where the others were. Most of those patients had been here for decades, Pamela continued. Some since the 1980s. This was their home, the only home many of them remembered. She handed me one of the documents. A transfer order dated March 15, 2019. Listed 12 patient names being relocated to a facility in Springfield. The state gave us 2 weeks' notice, she said. 2 weeks to find placement for 47 people who couldn't understand why they had to leave. I scanned the transfer order, saw Harold Morrison's name 3rd on the list, the tall man who wandered the West Wing looking for Dr. Peterson. They were confused, Pamela said. Scared. Some of them had been stable for years, but the sudden change... She shook her head. It was traumatic. She handed me another document. Death certificate. Harold Morrison, age 74, died June 3rd, 2019. Natural causes. 3 months after his transfer. Most of them died within the first year, she said quietly. Some within weeks. The new facilities were understaffed, overcrowded. The patients couldn't adjust. I looked at the death certificate again, tried to picture Harold in some unfamiliar place, looking for doctors who didn't know his name. Dorothy Chen lasted the longest, Pamela said, handing me another certificate. 14 months. But she kept asking to come home. Kept asking when she could come back to Riverside. Dorothy. The small woman who sat by the day-room window every night, waiting for her daughter to visit. They all wanted to come home, Pamela said. And eventually they did. She pulled out a different kind of document, something that looked more like a research report than hospital paperwork. I started noticing them about 6 months after the closure, she said. Security guards reported strange activity on the 3rd floor. Patients in the hallways, sitting in rooms that were supposed to be empty. I thought about my first night, standing alone in those hallways, feeling like someone was watching me. At first, I thought it was just grief, Pamela said. Staff members imagining things because we missed our patients. But the reports kept coming. Always the same descriptions, same people. She showed me the report. Witness statements from 3 different security guards, all describing the same elderly woman sitting by the day-room window. Dorothy Chen. I started researching, Pamela said. Psychic imprints. Consciousness that remains anchored to a location after death. Usually happens when someone dies with strong emotional attachment to a place. Psychic imprints. Made it sound scientific. Clinical. But I'd been talking to these people for months. They seemed real enough to me. The patients who come back, she said, they died believing they belonged here. Their consciousness is still anchored to Riverside because this was where they felt safe, where they had routine and care. I thought about Margaret Walsh, lining up for her 9 o'clock medication every night. Same spot at the nurse's station, same expectant expression. They're not harmful, Pamela said. Not as long as their routines aren't disrupted. They exist in a kind of loop, repeating the activities that gave their lives structure when they were alive. But the protocols, I said. Why can't I talk to them? Really talk to them? Pamela's expression grew serious. Because they're not fully aware of their situation. They exist in a state between life and death, maintaining the illusion that they're still alive, still patients receiving care. She pulled out one more document. Incident report dated 8 months ago. Clay Shepard's name at the top. Clay tried to have real conversations with them, she said. Tried to comfort a patient who was crying. Started answering their questions directly instead of following the protocols. I read through the report. Clay had apparently spent an entire night sitting with Dorothy Chen, trying to explain that her daughter couldn't visit because visiting hours had changed. Told Harold Morrison that Dr. Peterson had retired, but that the new doctor was very good. What happened? I asked. The illusion shattered, Pamela said. When they realized they were dead, that their doctors were gone, that their families couldn't visit, they became something else entirely. She showed me the final page of the report. Clay's handwritten statement, barely legible, described patients screaming, becoming violent, following him through the hospital corridors even during daylight hours. Psychic imprints that become aware of their true nature can turn dangerous, Pamela said. They're no longer peaceful. They're angry, confused, desperate, and they don't stay confined to the 3rd floor. I set down the incident report. My hands were shaking slightly. The protocols exist to maintain their peaceful state, Pamela said. Acknowledge them as patients. Don't disrupt their routines. Don't force them to confront reality. As long as they believe they're still receiving care, they remain harmless. And if I break the protocols, then you'll discover what Clay discovered, she said. And I'll need to find another custodian. Pamela reached behind her desk, pulled down what looked like a picture frame from the wall. Turned out to be bigger than I thought. Maybe 2 feet by 3 feet. A collage of photographs, 47 of them, arranged in neat rows with little nameplates underneath each one. This is all of them, she said. Everyone who lived on the 3rd floor when we closed. I leaned forward to get a better look. Black and white photos mostly, some in color. Professional headshots mixed with family pictures. Dorothy Chen smiled from the 2nd row wearing a floral dress. Harold Morrison stood next to a Christmas tree in what looked like a hospital common room. Where'd you get these? Families, obituaries, some from our own files. Pamela traced her finger along the top row. I started collecting them after the first few died. Seemed wrong not to have them somewhere. Made sense, I guess, though it felt strange looking at all those faces, knowing I'd been talking to some of them every night for months. I track their deaths, she continued. Read the obituaries. Call the families sometimes. Tell them their loved one's former home remembers them. She pulled out a thick manila folder from her desk drawer, different from the first one. This one had newspaper clippings sticking out the sides. Margaret Walsh died on a Tuesday. Family said she'd been asking about her room here. Wanted to know if someone was watering her plants. Pamela found a clipping near the bottom of the stack. Her daughter called me crying. Said Margaret kept talking about going home to Riverside. I looked at Margaret's photo. 3rd row, middle, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, but smiling. The encounters you have, Pamela said. They tell me things, how they're doing, whether they died peacefully or... She trailed off, shuffled through more clippings. Harold Morrison. You said he calls for Dr. Peterson every night? Yeah. Walks the West Wing. Same routine. Harold died asking for Dr. Peterson. Kept saying Peterson promised to check on him. Wouldn't believe the nurse when she said Peterson had transferred. Pamela found another clipping, smaller one. Family said he died agitated, upset. The pieces started connecting. These weren't just random ghost stories. You're gathering information about their final mental states. Exactly. She nodded. The way they behave here tells me how they died. Dorothy sits by the window waiting for her daughter. Peaceful routine. Her daughter told me Dorothy died in her sleep. No distress. Made sense. Horrible sense, but sense. But Harold paces, calls out, gets frustrated when Peterson doesn't come. Pamela tapped his photo. He died confused, scared. The family needed to know that wasn't their fault. She pulled out a notebook, different from mine, leather-bound, filled with handwriting. I counsel the families, tell them what I observe, help them understand their loved one's final emotional state. She flipped through pages covered in notes. Dorothy's daughter thought she'd failed her mother, hadn't visited enough. I told her about the window vigil, how Dorothy waits happily, not angry or abandoned, just patient. Hell of a thing, using ghost encounters for grief counseling. Does it help them? Most of the time. Pamela closed the notebook. Gives them closure. Knowing their family member's spirit isn't tormented. I studied the memorial wall again. All those faces, all those families getting phone calls from Pamela Wang at Riverside Memorial. What about the hospital? They know about all this? Pamela's expression shifted, got more careful. Administration is aware of the situation. Aware how? She hesitated, glanced at her office door like someone might be listening. The patients don't cause problems. No property damage, no disturbances that reach other floors. She lowered her voice. Actually, they prefer it this way. That caught me off guard. Prefer it? Think about it. We've got a closed wing that needs to stay maintained for insurance purposes. Empty buildings attract vandals, squatters, drug users. She leaned back in her chair. But nobody bothers the third floor anymore. I waited for her to continue. Security used to find broken windows up there, graffiti, people stealing copper wire from the walls. Pamela pulled out another folder. This one labeled security reports. Haven't had a single incident since the patients came back. Made a weird kind of sense. Hard to break into a place if you think it's haunted. The patients protect their home, she continued. Scared off 3 different groups trying to strip metal last year. Security cameras caught them running down the stairwell, never came back. So administration just lets it happen. More than that, they encourage it. She found a memo in the security folder, official hospital letterhead. Insurance investigators avoid the third floor completely now. Used to come by monthly checking for damage, looking for reasons to drop our coverage. She handed me the memo, dated 6 months ago. Something about postponing third floor inspection due to ongoing atmospheric concerns. Atmospheric concerns? That's what they call it. Sounds better than haunted by dead patients. Pamela almost smiled. Point is, they don't want to go up there, which means the floor stays exactly like it was when patients lived there. I thought about that. All those rooms preserved, beds still made, chairs still arranged in therapy circles. What about potential buyers? Hospital's been talking about selling this building for years. Exactly. Pamela pulled out more papers, real estate documents. 3 different companies sent inspectors. All of them made it to the third floor. All of them left early. She showed me inspection reports, 2 pages each. Should have been 10 or 15 for a whole floor. Unable to complete assessment due to unusual environmental factors. She read from one report. Recommend alternative evaluation methods. The next report was even shorter. Assessment terminated early. Advise against further third floor inspections. So nobody wants to buy a haunted hospital. Which keeps the building in hospital hands, keeps the patient's home preserved. Pamela gathered up the reports. Administration sees it as a win. Reduced maintenance costs, no vandalism, Insurance inspectors stay away. Buyers get discouraged. Hell of a business strategy. Use ghosts as security guards. Plus, Pamela continued, it's good for the hospital's reputation. Shows we care about our former residents, honor their memory. By letting them haunt the place, by letting them stay home. She put the memorial wall back on its hook, all 47 faces looking down at us. These people lived here for decades, some for 30 years or more. This was their family, their community. I looked at Dorothy Chen's photo again, thought about her sitting by that window every night, waiting. Administration considers it a memorial service that costs nothing and prevents problems. Pamela straightened the frame. As long as the protocols keep them peaceful, everyone benefits. The patients got to stay home. The families got closure. The hospital saved money and looked compassionate, even made sense in a twisted way. What happens if word gets out? Media finds out you've got a ghost ward? Pamela shrugged. Confidentiality agreements cover that. Besides, who'd believe it? She gestured to her office. Sounds crazy unless you've seen it yourself. True enough. I wouldn't have believed any of this 7 months ago. The arrangement works, she concluded, settling back behind her desk with the memorial wall restored above her head. Pamela leaned back in her chair, set her hands flat on the desk. So here's what I'm offering you, Maxwell. She looked right at me. You can transfer to day shift maintenance, different floor, regular work cleaning offices and mopping lobbies. Same pay, same benefits. I can arrange it. I waited. Or you stay. But if you stay, you understand what this really is. She gestured toward the wall of photographs, all those faces staring down at us. You're not just a custodian anymore. You're their guardian. Guardian. Hell of a word for a guy who mops floors. What's that mean, exactly? She picked up one of the folders, opened it. It means you accept responsibility for their well-being. You follow the protocols because they work, not because I told you to, but because you understand why. I thought about Harold calling for Dr. Peterson every night, Dorothy waiting by that window, Margaret lining up for pills that didn't exist. They're not gone, Pamela said. They're just somewhere else, somewhere between, and they chose to come back here because this was home. She was right about that. I'd seen it in how they moved through those halls, like they belonged there, like they knew every door, every corner. The choice is yours, she said. Day shift starts Monday if you want it. I looked at the photographs again, counted them. 47 people who got told they had to leave, who died scared and confused in places that weren't home. What happens if I say no, to both options, I mean? Then I find someone else. Simple as that. Someone who'll follow the protocols or someone who won't. Clay's replacement didn't work out either. Lasted 3 weeks before he quit. There was someone before me. Someone before Clay, too. How many people have you hired for this? You're the 4th. She closed the folder. Clay lasted longest before you. 6 months. 4th. Jesus. But here's the thing, and I'm not sure I can explain this right. When she told me about the protocols, about why they worked, it made sense, not the ghost part. That still felt impossible. But the way she described it. Think of it like this, Pamela said. You know how some old people with dementia get agitated when you correct them? Tell them their husband's been dead for 20 years? I nodded. My grandmother went through that. Same principle. They're holding on to something, a routine, a memory, a sense of place. You don't fix it by forcing reality on them. You work with what they need. She pulled out another document. This one looked different. Handwritten notes in margins. I've been tracking this for 3 years now, recording what helps, what makes it worse. The protocols aren't arbitrary, Maxwell. They're therapeutic. Therapeutic for dead people. When you acknowledge Dorothy without explaining why visiting hours changed, she stays calm, happy even. She gets to keep believing her daughter might still come. But her daughter won't. No. But Dorothy doesn't know that, and not knowing lets her wait peacefully instead of grieving. I understood what she meant. I'd seen Dorothy by that window. Never upset, never crying, just waiting, patient. Harold keeps looking for Dr. Peterson because that's who he trusted. When you tell him the doctor isn't available right now, he accepts it. He doesn't have to learn that Peterson retired, that the whole ward closed, that everyone he knew is gone. Made sense, I guess. Cruel kind of sense. The protocols keep them in their routines, Pamela continued. And their routines are what they need to feel safe, to feel like they still belong somewhere. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot. Do you know what this place was like before they came back? I shook my head. Empty, vandalized. Security found evidence of copper theft, drug use, squatters. The hospital board was ready to sell the entire building. She turned back to me. Now look at it. I thought about the third floor. Clean, quiet, peaceful, in its weird way. They're protecting it, she said, just by being there, by caring about it. That hit different. The idea that they were taking care of the place that used to take care of them. The third floor isn't abandoned anymore, Maxwell. It's inhabited by people who need it to stay exactly what it was. Their home. She sat back down, folded her hands. If you stay, you become part of that. You help maintain not just the building, but their sense of home, their dignity. Dignity. Another hell of a word. But I thought about how they always said please when they asked questions. How they stepped aside when I needed to mop. How they never got angry when I couldn't give them real answers. They treat you with respect, I said. Because you treat them with respect. Pamela nodded. The protocols aren't just about keeping them calm. They're about honoring who they were, who they still are. She leaned forward. This isn't a haunted house, Maxwell. It's not some horror movie where spirits terrorize the living. This is a sanctuary. A place where people who got displaced, who died afraid and confused, can come back to somewhere they felt safe. I sat there thinking about that. About Dorothy and Harold and Margaret. About all the faces on that wall. What happens to them if I leave? They stay. But without someone who understands the protocols, without someone who can document their needs and behaviors. She shrugged. Eventually the hospital board will notice the maintenance issues, or insurance will require a full inspection, or the state will demand the floor be properly secured. And then? Then they lose their home again. That settled it. I'll stay. She smiled. First real smile I'd seen from her. You sure? It's not going to get easier. If anything, understanding the truth makes it harder. You'll know exactly what you're seeing, what they've lost, what they need. I'm sure. Because I was. Sitting there in her office, looking at those photographs, thinking about Harold's voice echoing through empty halls and Dorothy's patient vigil by that window. I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about ghosts, it wasn't about supernatural anything, it was about home. About people who'd been thrown out of the only place they felt safe, who died without that safety and who found a way back to it. The protocols work, I said. I get that now. You do. And they're not just existing up there. They're living, in their way. Exactly. Pamela opened a new folder. They have routines, relationships with each other, purposes. Harold looks after the other patients. Margaret helps organize the medication line. Dorothy keeps watch by the window. Community. They'd built a community. They're not lost souls, I said. They're people making the best of where they are. That's exactly right. I thought about my own situation. Divorce, debt, sleeping in my truck, making the best of where I was. I can help with that, I said, making the best of it. You already have been, without even knowing it. She was right. Every night for 7 months I'd been part of their routine, the guy who cleaned their home, who acknowledged them, who treated their space with care. It's more than just following protocols, Pamela said. You're ensuring their final home stays a place of healing instead of abandonment, a place where they can live out their memories with dignity. Dignity again, but I understood it now. They deserve that. They do. I stood up, felt different than when I'd sat down, like something had shifted. So I'm not just a custodian. No, you're their guardian, their advocate, the person who makes sure they're treated with respect. Guardian. The word didn't feel so strange anymore. I can do that. And I meant it. Not just the cleaning, not just following rules, but understanding that Dorothy's wait by the window mattered, that Harold's search for Dr. Peterson was important, that Margaret's place in line deserved respect. The 3rd floor is an empty space, I said. It's their home. Exactly. I looked at the photographs one more time. 47 people who'd found their way back to where they belonged. I could help them stay there,